So here's the big mistake people make in all walks of life is they go, this is what success looks like. And then they build to here, and then real life happens here. And this gap here is our, what the fuck? Why isn't my business taking off? Why isn't my relationship like this? Why aren't I winning this tournament? How come I'm not a famous musician? I'm still playing shitty clubs. Because we've got this fixation on what success looks like. And we haven't figured out how to map our brain to what the journey looks like.
Today, I'm honored to talk to a pioneer of self-defense and combat systems around the world, Tony Blauer. As the founder and CEO of Blauer Tactical Systems, Tony has taught performance enhancement and fear management techniques to the U.S. Special Forces, Navy SEALs, Secret Service, and many others. So I'm excited to dive deep today into the psychology of fear and what it really takes to show up in the moments when your dream or maybe even your life is on the line. So Tony, welcome to the show.
Hey man, I love that. I love that last line of your intro, when your dreams and your life might be on the line. Very nice.
Yes,
Very
and I think
elegant.
it's so important, right? This aspect of managing fear, because I know you're obviously in this combat world. This podcast, though, is more about the psychology of really what it takes to live a great life. And I think, I want to dive a little bit into, self-defense and all that, what people can really do there. But mainly I want to talk about fear. And
Sure.
specifically about this idea of no fear. And when I talk about no fear, I don't, for our listeners, mean N-O fear, but K-N-O-W fear.
I should have worn my no fear shirt.
Yes.
I might go change really quickly, but that's our, that's the big thing is to get people to understand there's no such a thing as no fear, N-O fear. That is a great slogan that's the trademark of a very famous adrenaline based company that specialized in adrenaline sports. I think motocross or BMX bike or a combination of stuff. But they were from like the 90s, and I was a huge fan of their slogan because I was growing up as an athlete, as a martial artist. I had all this fear and trepidation of how would I perform, how would I do, and it was fear when you're growing up as do people like me? Am I going to fit in? Are my dreams going to come true in life? Why am I, but as a society, as a culture, we're taught not to talk about our fear.
Yeah.
Man up. Don't let people know you're afraid. But there's a balance. I agree with that, to an extent, but you'll be happy to know because most people see me as the combatives guy. And that's been my main business for 40 plus years, is training tier 1 military, law enforcement. Those are my main clients. We have another division that works with professional martial artists and self-defense instructors who get accredited to teach my research. But over 3 decades, I've taught at hospitals to psychologists. We've got relationships with EMS doctors, neuroscientists, psychologists, who are now looking at the research that I did in the 80s and applying it to helping people with PTSD, helping people understand how to learn faster. I don't like the word hack. It's got a negative connotation, but they're using our interesting approach to looking at fear and the psychology of fear instead of the physiology and biology of fear. And they're discovering that this original cycle of behavior that I created in the late 80s has immediate impact on people who are in a fear state. And in fact, there's a psychologist out of Greenwich, Connecticut, who called me up one day, and he said that he has had more success using our fear loop diagram and helping people navigate fear than almost anything he's learned in 20 years. Yeah, like it was insane to hear to hear that. So all of that to come back to the end of your intro where you said, hey, this could cost you your dream or your life. I may have to quote you on that in the future, because that's the biggest thing that I tell people after decades of teaching. People ask me, Max, what's the most important thing? And I tell them, I said, if I could only teach you one thing, and that would be my whole spear system, all the startle flinch, how to weaponize the startle flinch, how to be a human weapon, how to understand the body's instinctive responses to danger, and how to use that to protect yourself or your family, or to teach you fear. And I could only pick one of the two. After all these years, I would say if I could only pick one, I would teach you how to manage fear. Because you could have all of the other stuff, but if you're scared shitless and you can't move and you're immobilized, it doesn't matter what your skill set was. It doesn't matter what your arsenal was. And that's the thing that's created a lot of controversy over the years in the tactical community, in the martial arts world, in the self-defense world, where I would say, be careful what you practice. You might get really good at the wrong thing. And people would look at that as me condemning their chosen martial art. But really what I was talking about is there's no such thing as literal muscle memory, but what people think of as muscle memory is the neurotransmitters in your brain getting conditioned to move a certain way when you see certain things. And I was always talking about the intuitive neuroscience between practicing a certain movement over and over thickens the myelin sheath of the neurotransmitter, which predisposes you to move a certain way. And in a high stress situation, your executive function can get hijacked by your emotional systems, the reptilian brain, the limbic system, the amygdala, and all of those functions working together, whatever you want to call it. So I know I'm off on a crazy tangent here.
No, I'm loving it.
but all of these are factors that influence what happens next. And the buffer of making the right decision is your ability to manage fear between stimulus and response, right? That gap time between there's the stimulus, there's the response. And now you can mitigate and influence some of that by intelligent scenario-based training. I had an amazing, just popped in my mind now. I actually interviewed him, never met him, a guy named Glenn Sunshine, who's he's a father first and foremost, but he's also a university professor. And I got an email from him years ago where he thanked me for helping raise his children. And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
I'd reread that again. And wow, when did I do that?
Yeah.
And so in the early 90s, I released an audio tape. You guys will have to Google what audio tape is.
Yeah.
It's an analog version of an MP3. And it was called Cerebral Self-Defense, The Mental Edge. And it was just a 90-minute audio tape back in 1993. And I had first created it in 87, 86. But then when I started launching like learning products that people could order, VHS, Google that. No one knows what VHS is anymore. But we had VHS tapes, so we had all these audio cassettes. But he had bought that. And it was where I laid out for people who because of geography, couldn't access me. I was trying to, my mission since I'm 20 is how do I make people safer? How do I make the world safer? That's what has consumed me for decades. And so in this letter, Max, he says to me, I began teaching my kids how to look at fear from this audio tape based on that. He says, I didn't know it at the time, but now they're fully grown. And when they're together with their other peers, I can see my son and my daughter, how they handle a world event, a discussion at the dinner table, the decision to travel. They're completely different than their peer group. And the only thing that would be different from kids that grew up, with families that hang out together was the way they related to fear. And he thought to thank me, like I think it was like 10 or 15 years later. And I was so blown away by that. I actually interviewed him on my podcast, the No Fear podcast, to ask, because I'd never met him. I was like, holy shit.
That is crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. All of that to say, with respect to the mission of your podcast and your focus on living, optimizing your life and self-actualizing, everything comes down to, you peel any onion, any obstacle, any moment of doubt and hesitation in life can be tracked back to a fear spike that made you stop and not think, stop and overthink what's going on. So I'm happy to report that the most important stuff that we do now, and what's a big focus for my company in 2020, is more of the, on one side of the spectrum, we have all our survival stuff, and the other side is all so we got our personal safety and then professional development to the right. That when you understand how to manage fear, you then apply that to any confrontation in life, interpersonal, with your spouse, with your kids, with your friends, with your colleagues at work. And then more importantly, I always tell people, like, the biggest fight that you're ever going to have is the one in your head.
Yeah.
Am I good enough to do this? Should I follow my dream? Like you said, should I get married? Should I get divorced? Should I quit this job? Should I start this company? All of those are confrontations in our mind.
Yes, Tony, there's so much great stuff here that I really want to dive deeper in, the fear loop and how we can really learn to deal and manage our fears. But first of all, you sort of alluded to before, you're no stranger to fear, right? You've been really studying this scientifically for decades. You've been in martial arts since you were 7. You've been a professional skier. So how has your own relationship with fear evolved over time?
It's an interesting question. So one of the reasons I study it so much is because I thought I had more fear than anyone else in the world.
Wow.
So it wasn't like, and this is an interesting thing. I do this talk where I was working with a special operations group down at Fort Bragg, and I got in a couple of days early, and a meeting at a coffee shop, and I'm there with a few of the soldiers, and one of the guys says to me, "Hey, do you want to go jumping?" And I go, like, up and down jumping? He goes, haha. He says, like, jumping, skydiving out of an airplane. I said, I knew what you meant. I'm just trying to be funny. He said, so do you want to go? I said, no, thanks. I'm good. He goes, I thought you're Mr. Fear Management. You're afraid to jump out of an airplane? He says, are you afraid to jump out of an airplane? And I said, actually, no, I've done it twice. As feared, I don't like heights. I never thought I would jump out of an airplane, but I did it twice. I did a static line, I did a tandem jump, and I did it as a fear management experiment. So I am managing my fear by not jumping out of the airplane. So they all laugh, and, I could see by the body language of one of the guys sitting there that it was like a nervous laugh, like a, but the other guy was like, ha, like really laughing. And what I extract from this and what I explain to people is that they're both in the same unit. They're both qualified, but I could tell this guy doesn't like skydiving, but he does it. And it's a skill, and he manages his fear. But the guy who goes jumping every weekend, like this other guy would jump anytime he could, who's an adrenaline junkie, who's not afraid of heights, he's not managing fear because he likes to do it. So if you love to public speak, the number one fear in the world is what? Public speaking.
Yeah.
Right? Ridiculous, right? I remember talking to a group of university students, and I said, hey, what's your number one fear in the world? And there were hundreds of students, mostly female. I said, what's your number one fear in the world? And they all went, public speaking.
Yeah.
And I said, and there were 2 monitors there. They weren't on. There were 2 monitors on either side of the auditorium. And my talk it was during Sexual Assault Week. And I was there to talk about situational awareness and de-escalation and self-defense. And I started off with, what's the number one fear in the world? And they all said public speaking. That's what people mostly.
That is ridiculous.
But it is, right? If you look at every survey, and I said, look at the monitors. They're not on, but pretend it's a video of you being chased into an alley by 1 or 2 attackers, and you're going to get raped. That wasn't on your list. Would you rather come up on stage now and stumble through a speech, or would you rather have the skill to avoid being attacked? Why isn't personal defense, the ability to protect yourself or your family, on our list? And that's one of the things is, like, we insulate ourselves. We try to avoid thinking about bad things and dangerous things. And so it doesn't even factor on our list. But if you look at most polls around the world, it's public speaking. Anyways, I went off on a crazy tangent. Back to here I am at Fort Bragg. I'm talking to these guys, and I look at the guy and I say, he goes, oh, you want to go skydiving? I go, no. He goes, oh, aren't you Mr. Fear Management? I said, yeah, I'm managing my fear by not jumping in an airplane. They all laugh. And I point out and I notice the two body languages. And I look at the guy and I say, so you don't have any fear? He goes, no, I love skydiving. I said, no fear. He goes, no. So I got hundreds of, 600 jumps, and I go anytime I can. I said, okay, let me pack your chute for you today. But before you say yes or no, I want to tell you that I have trouble folding t-shirts. I don't know what I'm doing. And he looks at me, Max, and he laughs. He goes, you're not fucking coming anywhere near my chute. You're not touching it, right? And I looked at him and I smiled and I went, fear, right? And he stopped for a second. People who get really used to, they're what's called stress inoculated. They've got their ritual down. They do so. If you ask somebody, hey, are you afraid to go in your MMA fight? Are you afraid to go box? Are you afraid to go on this mission? Are you afraid to, you ask a race car driver, right? Are you afraid to drive 200 miles an hour around a track? They're like, no, man, I love it. Like, but remember, we got these two things here. We got a guy who loves that. And then we got a guy who's gotten good at it because he loves the sport or the event. When the story with the two soldiers is I had one guy there who his goal and purpose in life was to be a protector, to be a warrior, to be a soldier, to represent his nation, whatever the story was that got him. And then one day somebody said, you got to hold your breath underwater, or you got to jump out of an airplane. And he was like, oh, fuck, yeah, that's right. I forgot about that when this dream started to cultivate. Another guy who, right. And so this is what I tell people. You can't be brave if you're not afraid.
Yes.
You can't be brave if you're not. It's a very important thing for your listeners to remember, because when you get a fear spike for anything, you can use that fear as a fuel, as opposed to an obstacle that's, because you can misread that, like tea leaves. Oh, that means maybe I'm not supposed to do this because I'm afraid, or we fixate on the fear and it interferes with the performance or what we need to do next. So fear can be cathartic if we learn how to study it.
Wow, that's so interesting. So am I getting you right here that is really some people that are just born sort of almost fearless in certain aspects, like skydiving, for example, they simply don't really think through the consequences. And there's other people that really learn this as a skill and actively like develop that out of necessity almost.
I don't know if someone's born that way. I think that I think everyone's probably afraid of falling and heights. Here's a great example and something that I still regret. My son is somewhat afraid of heights. And I remember him 7 years old at my gym. He climbed up on the turnbuckle of the ring, and I had an elevated ring, and he was sitting up on the foam, the corner padding of the foam, which isn't very sturdy. I mean, it's a soft foam. And he's sitting up there, and he's got his hands on the ropes, and he's elevated now about 6 feet, plus he's seated, and let's say that's another 2 feet. So he's 8 feet up. It's an elevated ring in my gym back when I used to live in Canada. And if he fell backwards, there was a good chance that he would hit the edge of the ring and then hit and land on his head on a solid wooden floor, could break his neck, and remember, I don't like heights. So I'm in my office looking around, and all of a sudden, like, I don't hear Nick like running around the gym. And I'm like, dude, where is he? And I see him bouncing up. He's climbed up, like any 7 or 8 year old kid would do. And he's sitting there bouncing on the thing like this. And I visualized the negative potential. And I went, Nick. And he froze because I got scared as his dad, because he was like bouncing on this thing. And he tightened up on it. And I saw him freeze with fear. And I went, don't move. And I rush over. I go, dude, you can't climb up, and you got to be careful. And that moment implanted like a seed for fear of heights with him.
Wow.
Conversely, and I saw that and I was so angry with myself because what I had done is projected my fear. So when you ask, are people born a certain way? The day before that event, he was climbing. The day after that event, he now has trepidation about heights. And so the guy that wasn't afraid to skydive, you know, did he grow up with 3 older brothers, on a farm, jumping off the roof into bales of hay, in the country, jumping off of bridges into rivers and like that? Or, you know what I'm saying, is like, what was he exposed to as a kid? I don't have a thought or an opinion. That's just my intuition that we all knew somebody in school that had that mythological fearlessness to anything. They would do like crazy things. I remember at this just popped in my head for no reason, but 8 or 9 years old, out in my elementary school, there was this big guardrail with like a drainage ditch right beside the school, and we were out there in the playground area kicking around a soccer ball, and it got kicked into this ditch. And so someone had to climb over this railing and get down there and get it. And it was dry out. It was for water runoff and stuff like that. It wasn't a big deal, but it was, it was like a 5-foot fence, iron fence. And then it dropped down like 4 or 5 feet. So to get over that and get on the other side, it was 9 feet, right? You're standing up, you got to go over the fence, and then you climb down, drop down, get the ball. And, so we start to run towards the ball, and one of the kids we were playing with goes, "I got it." And he starts fucking running. And he as he gets to it, he jumps forward, grabs the bar, and does like a handspring over the top and lands like fucking Spider-Man on the inside. Wow. I'm like 10 years old, like going like this, dude, Max, like this. And it was like, I was blown away by it. No one else did that. I'd never seen that, but that was one of those things I was like, and you're 9 years old. Like, I didn't go up to him and go, and like, now I would walk up to a kid and go, "Why do you do that? How do you do that? What made you think you can do that?"
Yeah.
And what you would find out is he's on the gymnastics team. He's been doing gymnastics and tumbling for years, and that he's actually done that like multiple times before. It just, for all of us, looked like it was the first time, because it looked like he jumped, but he didn't check to see like was it a bottomless pit?
Yeah, sure. All that stuff that you usually think about, like
yeah, you're like, okay, what am I going to land on? So it's an interesting thing. But the more important observation isn't some people are born fearless and some people aren't. I think what it is we're born, and then we're educated through osmosis, through repetition, through good or bad parenting, or preferably less desirable or desirable parenting. We've got good coaches and we've got bad coaches, and these become our notions, our thoughts, our patterns, or our ideas. I never directly answered your question as like, tell them, what was my life with managing fear? I believe that I created a very practical fear management system because I've never stopped looking for ways to understand and therefore manage fear. So I developed this for myself, but like anything else, it wasn't real. It wasn't 3-dimensional to me. I would go, I want to do this, want to do this. And I happened to be a tennis instructor, a ski instructor, loved martial arts. So I wouldn't call it a gift, but a passion for helping other people. So even like I was teaching skiing professionally when I was 15 years old. The hill that I worked for had to get an exception for me in their insurance policy because I was under 18 years old.
Wow.
But I was from a very famous ski family. Everyone knew me. I was on skis when I was 3 years old. And so everyone knew, oh, there's Tony, and I just remember like loving the moment of getting another person to do something they didn't think they could do before. So the whole fear thing was actually serendipity. It wasn't like I had a program. So like we have now a no fear course, KNOW, right? For everybody, don't confuse it. K, no fear. How do we get to no fear? When we change our relationship with fear, we change our life. So every parent, every dad, every kid, everyone, if I said, well, why aren't you doing that? They might not use the word fear, but if I got them, if I injected them with some metaphoric truth serum and I said, why are you hesitating here? Why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you asking that person to dance? Why aren't you asking that person? Why aren't you lifting that much weight? Why didn't you defend yourself? Why didn't you pull your gun? Why did you pull your gun? Why, like whatever we're talking about, very often when there's an element of delay and rumination, remember we're talking about stimulus response, the Viktor Frankl, the very famous Viktor Frankl quote, right? But the decision to choose in between is fear management. It's not about being reactive, it's about being responsive. And there's no guarantee, there's no, all it is like one of the questions I get asked over and over again, hey, if I buy your online course, if I go to your live seminar, if I study this stuff, like, so I'll be able to manage fear. I always tell people the process is about developing self-awareness. When you improve your self-awareness, you then you open up the door to an opportunity to have a conversation about fear with yourself. And in that moment, you start to affect change. And some confrontations might take you years to manage, right? It depends on what it is and how you defined it to yourself and what it means to yourself. And some stuff is just a question of, wow, okay, here we go. I'm afraid. And here's the other big thing is like, if you're truly afraid of something, whether it's performance anxiety or there's real risk or danger, like physical, emotional danger, it may be an event that's on a trajectory that you need to do it. You need to take care of it. Now there's the serendipity of my observations, exploration, and the creation of the program were because I believe that there is no single event more immediate than for you to solve than imminent danger. And so the ability to protect yourself or a loved one against a violent encounter is the most pure moment of managing fear. But the idea is for everyone listening, when you're managing fear, it doesn't mean that you're not afraid anymore. Remember, you can't be brave if you're not afraid. Yeah. Remember that maxim. So to manifest courage, I need to be scared first. If I'm not scared and I go do something, and let's say I'm not scared of grabbing a snake or putting on a tourniquet, or you look at it like a doctor saving someone's life and you're like, holy shit. Yeah. And you go like, wow, how did you manage your fear there? What are you talking about? Like for some of them, like this is automaton, this is robotic. They're fascinated with the human body. They're obsessed with saving people and it's not an emotional event for them. It'd be interesting to peel their timeline onion and go, how did you feel the first time you worked on a cadaver? What did you feel the first time, you saved somebody's life? Like, was it emotional? Like, because stress inoculation is when you have a realistic, relevant scenario that you repeat over and over again and your body gets acclimated to it. So that's a whole other area of my company that we figured out for personal defense and for law enforcement military training, is this what I call like brain-based, evidence-based scenario training. I love the word serendipity. Out of doing that, I saw all of these like experts, high-level martial artists, experienced operators, not performing as they thought. And then I saw their disappointment or frustration with their performance, from defiance and anger to, man, I really messed that up. And I was like obsessed with, for years, like, Why did they think they were going to do this and then they didn't? And slowly, and I'm crystallizing things quickly because this took thousands of hours
Yeah.
over many years. It was because the stimulus, the risk, the danger, whether it was self-imposed or actual or combination, caused them to move in a more primal fashion, a more emotional fashion, a more reactive fashion that they hadn't been exposed to in training. And the frustration, disappointment, defiance, or depression, or whatever they felt because they didn't live up to what they had envisioned, was because their cognitive brain, where they held the vision of how it was going to go down, was hijacked by what happened. And so what I figured out is if we could replicate what's really going to happen, then your brain's adaptation through metacognition starts to speed up. And the notion was if we improve our perception speed, we also improve our reaction time. I want the fastest possible reaction time. But if I practice something that looked like this over here, and then real violence was over here, I need to account for this gap in dissonance. But what if I said, let's study violence, let's study fear, let's study reaction, let's study doubt, hesitation, fixation, anxiety, and then track that back to movement and stimuli, then suddenly what I had, the people I was training, is I said, look, this is what real life looks like. Real life only happens once, but what if instead of us practicing some stylized movement over here, I'm going to switch hands so you can see me.
Yeah.
So instead of so here's the big mistake people make in all walks of life is they go, this is what success looks like. And then they build to here, and then real life happens here. And this gap here is our, what the fuck? Why isn't my business taking off? Why isn't my relationship like this? Why aren't I winning this tournament? How come I'm not a famous musician? I'm still playing shitty clubs. Because we've got this fixation on what success looks like. And we haven't figured out how to map our brain to what the journey looks like. And that's done through scenario training and also that discussion. So I was able to, over decades of the training, is to go, you know what, let's stop looking at what perfect looks like. Let's look at what really happens. So I started studying real violence and real movement and real reactions. And then we would do, so instead of a scenario that looked like perfect up here, I go, well, they all look like this shit here. Let's practice this shit on purpose.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I would tell people we would start a seminar. I would say, in a real violent encounter, are you off balance emotionally for a period of time? And everyone went, yes. And then I would ask, are you off balance psychologically then? And they would go, yeah, that makes sense. That's linear. And I go, and is there a good chance that you're off balance physically at the beginning of a violent encounter? And they would go, yeah. I go, so why are we always practicing on balance? In other words, we would practice in a perfect stance. We would practice with a perfect punch, a perfect counter. We would say, hold on a second, I wasn't ready. Let's start
So you're
again.
like 5 minute visualize and then.
Right. Right. And so I eliminated all of that. And I would say, if we're off balance emotionally, psychologically, and physically in a real violent encounter, what would happen to us if we practice off balance on purpose?
Wow.
We would actually be on balance during an off balance event, because our brain could go, isn't this what we fucking been training for? And in that moment, when you've got that resonance and you go, my training was correct. Now we go back to perfect wasn't here when this is what the chaos was. We replicated the chaos over here, and then the chaos happened. And now the degree of improvisation was, oh shit, I need to move here instead of this whole gap, if that makes sense. But through that, I keep coming back to this. What I noticed was changes in how big people's eyes got when they pulled shit off. How after the training event, they were like, wow. And I noticed, whether you want to say dopamine, serotonin, all the brain chemicals, and I don't care about any of that shit. You know, it's funny. There's always new research and studies coming on. Oh, look, they found a little thing here that enhances courage here, does, and they ask me what I think about it. I go, it doesn't change startle, flinch, convert. It doesn't change fear. The, where something's located in my brain, if I can't grab it, take my courage pill, and so it's fascinating that it's there, but we knew it was there. We just didn't know where it was. It doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is empowering you. If you were my student, I wouldn't come up to you and go, hey, listen, like just inside the amygdala here, let me show you a PowerPoint. There's this little area you're going, dude, I'm really scared of somebody punching me.
Yeah. Like, how does that?
Right. No, but you understand, like this is, and I'm not making fun of this stuff. I'm just saying that when I started talking about performance psychology in the 80s, I would say peak performance is irrelevant. And all the sports psychologists would go, well, what are you talking about? I go, well, if it's literal and I peak today, then what am I doing tomorrow? If it's literal, then that was the best I was ever going to be. Well, that's kind of depressing. Why can't I peak every day? Why can't I'm turning 60 in May. Why can't I be the strongest, fastest 60-year-old version of Tony in May? If I only thinking about, when I was 32 and I peaked, then I'm like, wow, I miss being 32, right? So I shifted this to, let's not ever talk about peak performance. Let's only talk about performance enhancement. On any given day, I'm injured, I'm sick, I'm run down, I had a shitty night's sleep. I'm managing fear. How do I make sense of all of these distractions and then focus to get to that proverbial flow state?
Wow. Yeah, no, there's just so many interesting things here that I really want to dissect. So like what you just said here really about like, performance enhancement, I think that's so key because like people tend to, focus on like the best day, right? What's the best I can do? But the reality is, and then you sort of alluded to it, right? Like that most days was this, the attacker suddenly coming in, right? Or was this your boss suddenly approaching you? Like most days you aren't up here, you're up like down here, right? And you have to deal with this reality that's sort of wishy-washy. You don't know exactly what's going to happen. So you need to practice also for this, right? And prepare for this, for the moments when you're not feeling your best, when you're emotionally and psychologically out of balance, you still need to show up. And what you said before about, learning to deal with these fears was also so interesting. Because like the whole reason really I started this podcast was because I was deathly afraid of like speaking to people. Like even talking to, my best friends, my family, whatever, I was scared shitless. And so my way sort of learning to how to overcome it, right, was just approaching random strangers on the street. And now, starting the psychology podcast, we get to talk to people like you that I would have been, running away basically.
Right.
Even a couple months before probably. So it's really just a process of getting used to that fear and learning to face it over and over again. So do you have any, other than just do it sort of thing, do you have any more effective strategies for people, they're self-aware, they know I have this fear, maybe it's public speaking, maybe it's something else, approaching that, guy or girl, whatever it is. How do you then go from, understanding I have this fear to actually doing it?
Yeah, great question. And congrats on your self-awareness for doing
Thanks.
that, because had you not said that, if someone had said, hey, that guy Max, he's kind of an introvert and quiet. I go, what are you fucking talking about? He was interrupting me and running off on tangents and loves to, I'm joking. But so, I mean, you're living proof that scenario-based training can change behavior.
Yes.
Because every time you do an interview, that's scenario-based training. Think about this. So scenario-based training is, the way I do it, it's replicating an event based on something that you believe could happen or is real. So there's a part of this conversation that's not real, even though it's real. And what that means is there's a premise and there's an agenda. Oh, I have a podcast on mindset and behavior, and I'm going to reach out to Tony Blauer and he's going to say yes or no. And it's either going to be a good call or it's not going to be a good call, but I'm going to do it. But it's, in my mind, it's like doing a scenario, because it's not like we grew up together and we're friends and we're hanging out. And I said to you, Max, like, you got so many interesting ideas, but you never talk to anybody. It's like pulling teeth to get you, and you're like, I don't want to talk. You know, like that's real life. And I hope I'm not getting too wishy-washy here. This
No, no,
is real
I'm
life.
loving this. Yeah.
Yeah, this is real life, but it's not. It's a deliberate exercise to help empower you, but it's a great example for your listeners of the power of intelligent scenario training that can change behavior. That's the neuroplasticity of the brain. We're changing behaviors. You got to want to do it. You got to believe they're going to happen, and then you got to find safe, realistic ways to make it happen. So you asked me, is there a better way? So I just wanted to kind of look back at what you did, amplify that a little bit, and go, what you did is the example. So, but that can't change. So your self-awareness said, man, and you don't have to use the word fear. There's a lot of people that are like, oh, no, I'm not afraid. They don't want to say afraid, you know, whatever you want to call it. Right. But if there's doubt that goes unchecked, that becomes hesitation. Now you're mugging yourself. What I mean by that is there's only one thing we can't regenerate in life, and that's time.
Yes.
So when you waste time, you're mugging yourself. How do I stop mugging myself? Right. And that's kind of a neat thought. It's like, fuck, I'm overthinking.
Yeah.
How do I stop mugging myself? Because if someone were mugging you, you would go, stop mugging me.
Yeah, right.
Right. You would want to stop that. So how do I stop stealing time from myself? Well, you look at and you go, I need to manage fear better. Well, but I'm not afraid to brush my teeth. Well, if you need root canal and you got a big infection in your mouth, you're probably going to hesitate, you know. But so you look at the problem, and I'm off on some crazy example here, but the anything that creates doubt and hesitation will create some sort of overthinking fixation. And that unchecked can turn into one day some sort of anxiety for something. And anxiety doesn't have to be a panic attack. Anxiety could be, hey man, are you going to pick up the phone and call that person? You need to fire them. You need to break up with that person. You need to, call at the bank and tell them that you need a loan, or you need an extension, or and we hesitate. We avoid those conflicts all the time because we're in the fear loop, right? When we change our self-awareness about it, we understand that we are wasting time, and that this scenario is imminent, and then it's going to get immediate. And the closer and faster and the less prepared I am, the worse off in theory it could be. That the moment I get my initial fear spike, if I could stop there, if it's not dangerous to stop and look at it. So my Sharpie is my fear spike. If I'm not driving or in the middle of a fight or whatever, I can stop and look at that and go, this is a fear spike. I'm going to use this as a cathartic moment. What can I learn? What is life and this moment telling me to do? And let me use an example. I was with one of my team yesterday, going over some advanced coaching stuff, and I was explaining to him that you could be, he was a pro Thai boxer for 10 years and martial artist for 30 years. And I said, I can look at a fighter who he's caught in the corner and he's covering up like this, and his sparring partner's nailing him with body shots, and I'm yelling at him, get out of the corner, spin, grab his head, clinch, whatever, and he's not doing it. Why isn't he applying some of the counter maneuvers that we practice? Well, he's in the fear loop. He's stuck. And if you're a good coach, I define coaching in 3 tiers. There are everyone says I'm their coach, but they're either a technician, they're a trainer, or there's the coach status. And there's very few true coaches. The technician is that person that could be your boss. Your boss is a technician. He comes in, he goes, yeah, I don't like that font, and change the size, right? That's technician. Yeah. That's like put your finger here. It's like, the golf coach says, get your thumb like this. The shooting coach goes, get your thumb like this. The martial arts guy, no, get your thumb like this. That's a technician. The trainer is the person that understands the recipes to create stamina, endurance, speed, agility, right? They're like, hey, but here's the thing is a trainer needs to also be a technician, right? If I want to get you in shape and develop aerobic capacity and stamina and strength, and I'm hitting the bag, but every time you hit the bag, you sprain your wrist because you don't want to make a fist, right? But some coaches stay as trainers their whole career. Some trainers stay as trainers, but the highest level is a coach. And the job of the coach is to inspire performance, to make you better than you were the minute before you walked in the gym or the boardroom. And so you can be an executive and you're the CEO of the company or you're the manager. Are you coaching your team or are you telling them what they did wrong? And so the coaching element is, how do I help them navigate fear? How do I help them improve their self-awareness? This is the, as I said earlier in the show, a division that we're rapidly building out in the company, is doing a lot more corporate, stuff. So we've got survive, thrive, two sides of this is me. I need to be able to protect myself or my family, whether I'm traveling, and it's not about learning a martial art. It's about learning the 3Ds: detect, diffuse, defense, situational awareness, verbal de-escalation, simple self-defense, core to extremity movement. For most people, that event never happens, right? But just because that event never happens, if I applied that logic to having a fire extinguisher in the house or the office, having a first aid kit, when's the last time you got a flat tire? You go, that I can't even remember getting a flat tire. Well, fucking ditch the spare tire in your car. No, that'd be stupid.
Yeah.
Get rid of your first aid kit. Why? What if like I need it? Yeah. And so there is no moment in life more important than avoiding and mitigating violence and what to do. So that's been our focus for 30 years. So now we realize, holy shit, that it's in that experience of learning how to be your own bodyguard that you have this epiphany of what fear management is. Because if I work with you and I go, will you protect yourself or your family? And you go, yeah. And you go, well, do you think being a salesman and having to do cold calls is scarier or less scary than self-defense? Well, less scary. Then get on the phone, make some calls, right? So whatever it is, in any aspect of business or life, you can now pivot and go back and go, yeah, doing those scenarios is way scarier than having this hard talk, right? Yeah. And this process is also, because geography and finances restrict people from getting live training, is how do I teach people to be their own coach? Ultimately, at the end of the day, even if I go in and I'm talking to a bunch of executives or whatever, and it could be a group of military, it could be a bunch of kids, whoever it is, my goal is to get them to understand that they need to coach themselves. That it's not about technician, trainer, coach. It's about, why am I hesitating? What's the origin of this fear? What can I learn at it? So if we go back to your original question and idea, is I get that stimulus. If I change my relationship with fear, I change my life. So going back to my conversation with Casey, where I go, hey, that guy's up against the ring. He's not countering. He's not spinning out. He's not clinching. He's in the fear loop. The technician goes, cover, get your elbows down, get your hands up, whatever. And he's like getting this conflict. The trainer goes, okay, we need to do more, aerobic conditioning. You got tired there, and that's why you hung out in the corner. Me, the coach, I'd walk up and I go, what's going on? And nothing, coach. Oh, like, I'm noticing this behavior, this pattern. What's going on there? Eventually he'll go, well, my next fight coming up in next month. I go, yeah, that's what we're training for. He goes, yeah. And if I peel the onion, I give him the permission to emote, right? Which is counterintuitive for any type A personality, male or female.
Yeah, especially I guess for fighters, these tough guys.
But anything, you could be a business executive, you could be a doctor, it could be anything. It's like, hey, let's not be emotional about this. This is just business, right? So there's that stigma there that prevents transparency, or at a minimum, it distorts transparency. eventually I find out that he was looking at some videotape of the guy he's fighting, and what the guy did was he get the guy in the corner, hit him with a body shot, cover the guy, clinch him, knee him, and now what he's doing is he's visualizing that this fighter is more experienced than him and he's going to get caught. In other words,
Wow.
he's and I'm just giving this as a hypothetical example, right? Of you see that and now that becomes the movie in your mind. So I tell people, you know, one of the acronyms we use when you're in the fear loop is false expectations appearing real. False expectations appearing real. That means I'm visualizing a future event that involves some sort of pain or something negative happening to me that's preventing me from moving or thinking clearly in the present. So false expectation is a future event. And so this guy's in the corner and he's trying to spar in real time, but he's also got this movie playing in his mind of this is how he's going to get beat. And so his body is moving and locking into the position because he's carrying the weight of fear with him. But if I have that talk and I go, so hold on a second, you're visualizing that's going to happen. So you know that if you stay there, you create the opportunity for that to happen. So what do you need to do to deflect that, to intercept that, to he says, well, I got to move. I got to do that. Okay, so let's do some drills. Sparring partner's going to try and corner you. And you know, if you stay in the corner, that this guy's go-to move, you're setting it up for him. Can't do that. As we explore, if people are tracking this, only through the study of fear do I also find out that he goes, yeah, I'm worried about, you know, his body shots and will I be able to take it? Well, that now becomes a training protocol. Well, I'm glad you said that. We're going to work on more body toughening. Then he goes, well, now I'm also, what would happen is everything he identifies, I'm not sure about my footwork, I'm not sure about this. Is we have a slide in all our fear management courses, whether it's a 90-minute or a workshop or a multi-day event. And the slide is this, it's the psychology of intimidation. It's when you're visualizing what your opponent can do to you instead of what you must do to your opponent.
Wow.
That's what most people do in life, right? If I say, hey, Max, why didn't you tell me about that? And you go, well, I was going to, but I just figured you would probably say no, right? You're visualizing.
Yeah.
All right. And I go, well, yeah, I mean, how many times has somebody said that to you in your life, Max? I got a few people around me where I go, why didn't you ask me? Why? Because you probably would have said no, because I know you're stubborn. And what they're doing is they're visualizing what I'm going to do in the future.
Yeah.
And that impacts what they need to do in the present. And when you start having these simple tools, you change how you communicate, first and foremost with yourself, and then with the people around you. It's insanely powerful. It's very exciting.
Yes, I love this really process of becoming more self-aware, of understanding yourself, of understanding your fears, and then learning to deliberately practice those things. Like you said, right? You notice you have this certain fear, and then you deliberately do things to put yourself in a situation where you can learn to manage it. And that, I think,
this is what you did, right? So you can practice courage, right? So you don't go, oh, Tony said you can practice courage. I'm going to go to the roughest part of town and try to get 3 guys to jump me and all. Manifest. No, that's not what I'm talking about. It's, you know, you have a fight with your better half, your spouse, your kid. There's a part of you that wants to hug them and have this over with and go, hey, look, I'm sorry how I talked to you. And I'm sorry, Dad. I'm sorry, you know, but we hold on to our anger. And so self-awareness says, okay, like we had that, let's fix it. There's a part of us so that's how you practice courage, right? Remember, you can't be brave if you're not afraid. Most people have trouble saying, I love you. Most people have trouble saying, I'm sorry. You notice little things in your life that are not consequential, whether it happens or not, but practice doing the right thing. Sit back and go, okay, like what would be this elevated gesture or movement here? Because that's how you slowly change behavior. And that's what you did when you recognized kind of afraid to talk to people. well, if I start a podcast, I'm going to have to. It'd be interesting for you
Yeah.
to look at your first and second podcast,
Oh,
and this one,
I was like
and
scared.
but actually to like
Mm.
take a picture and go, look at my body language here, count them. Like you haven't stopped smiling for 1 hour,
You know,
right?
I'm so into this. Like I'm loving this so much. I can't stop.
But it'd be interesting to look at your first, second, fifth podcast and go and count how many times you smiled versus didn't. Count how many
Yeah.
times you talked, but you did it. Did you go to a scripted question?
Yeah, that was the
or
crazy thing,
or
right? I remember like in the beginning, like literally I had like these 20 questions like scripted out, and I wouldn't even listen honestly. Like I would just literally go from
Sure.
question to question to question because I was so scared to like even like think of the next answer or question or whatever. So it was, it was
and
ridiculously bad.
and you know, but the most important thing is you're practicing courage.
Yes.
And then you get to the point where, you know, someone goes, so hey man, are you afraid to, you know, do a podcast? No, I love it.
Yeah.
But wait a minute, I thought you were afraid of public speaking. I'm afraid of talking to people. Like, you know, now what's an interesting thing is, and here's a really important thing, is through the pressure of of me being my worst critic and wanting to touch every single student that came in the 80s. We trained thousands of people through our scenario process, and I was obsessed with why, you know, I would say, okay, what would you do here, and everyone would write down like what they thought they were going to do, and then we put them in a scenario, and then I go, Jim, you said if somebody ever came up to you and grabbed you like that you would headbutt him and box his ears and do this, but you actually flinched and turned away and got taken to the ground, and you ended up doing okay and breaking contact and getting away. But why didn't you pull off that move that you thought you were going to do? I don't know, coach. Like it was suddenly it was on top of me and it's this, and I couldn't remember, and so on and so forth. And I would look at that over and over again. And I was like, wow, like here are like these really good martial artists and combat sport athletes. And when I changed the timeline and the rhythm of the dance that they were used to, they were more emotional and reactive. And it was like, okay, well, how do I train for that? That's that off balance on purpose principle. But then there was another part that kept nagging at me, and that became when you accept being afraid and you use the fear as a fuel, you don't purge it from your system, but you don't notice it as a distraction because you've accepted it. So if I said to you, hey, Max, I want you to do a podcast with this guy. He's the most famous guy in the world. There might be some guest on here where you're like, okay, hi, I'm Max. I'm going to talk to you about that. Like, and you're like, because you hold this person with like, so you can change the game, and now you stretch yourself more by you know, I always say that every arena changes the amount of stress you feel. And so I've had things, and I want everyone to understand this, that even though I've been teaching and studying, researching and designing exercises to help people understand fear, I get fear spikes all the time. I didn't get to a point where I went, well, I'm obviously, you know, the master of the universe for fear management. What it is, it's fear management. So it's like if I study nutrition, I still need to eat.
Yeah.
I don't like, let's say I redefine nutrition. It doesn't mean I don't need to eat anymore, or it doesn't mean that I get to eat like ice cream all the time because I understand nutrition. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. So
People,
you have to practice and apply it. Yeah.
well, it's not only that, it's that it's real life. I'm a human. I need to eat. What am I going to put in my body? I'm a human. I need to think. What am I going to consume? Am I listening to this shit, or am I going to listen to a good podcast? And that doesn't mean that I can't listen to shit. And I use shit, whatever, meaning like just like garbage for the brain. There's, you know, sometimes I want to watch a bad movie that, you know, just because I want to just, like last night, I'd worked about 14 hours yesterday preparing for a big trip to Europe. And I never do this. I don't watch TV in bed. I don't have a TV in my bedroom. But my brain was so this, I grabbed my iPad and I put on a comedy show and fell asleep during it. It's not a ritual, but I had enough self-awareness to go, I need to just like go into some like fun, clever comedy. And what's amazing is, you know, I'm there with my wife in bed. I woke up in the morning. I said, I fell asleep during the show, right? She goes, yeah, I watched 2 episodes. I said, what? You went ahead in the series? But it was funny because on my intuition when I got in bed knew that my brain was so activated that I needed a complete change the channel reset. And as soon as I did that, I relaxed enough and passed out. So, you know, it's, I guess, you know, what I'm trying to share with you and everyone listening to this is to self-actualize as a human, to become the best version of yourself, to empower the people that you care about around you, whether it's family or your staff, even to protect. We have a maxim that, you know, that fear throttles everything we do, from who we talk to where we live, to how much money we make, to how much weight we lift, to whether or not you're going to defend yourself. And the ability to protect yourself or loved one is arguably the single most important skill you could possess. But all the people that I've studied for decades who manifested courage, whether they were trained or not, had to do one thing first, and that's manage their fear.
Yeah.
Right. So I've got stories that we share in our Be Your Own Bodyguard class of like untrained citizens fighting back, dude, like against crazy odds. And if you ask them, like, well, here's a person that didn't do Krav Maga, didn't do MMA, didn't do jiu-jitsu, didn't do Thai boxing, out of shape, overweight, but kicks this like burglar's ass,
Yeah.
who was on top. Like, how does that happen? And when you hear her being interviewed, it's like this one woman that we share her video. She said, you know, I've got a wheelchair bound son, and I knew that if something happened to me, something happens to him. I had to fight back. Well, what is that? That's an elegant way of saying I managed my fear. I was scared for this other person and had to protect us. It's just another way to explain managing fear.
Wow.
But the biggest thing and the hardest thing for people to grasp is they think that when they get to a certain degree, a belt or whatever, that now they are somehow exempt from the experience. So I'm here to tell you, you know, I'll be 60 in May, that I still have fear, but the fear I have is when I get a fear spike, I immediately start to get tactical about understanding what it is. And in that research, that changes how long I stay in the fear loop. In some cases, it's a nano moment. I can switch it. And in some cases, it's like, okay, we got to study this. Okay, we got to, you know, let's analyze this. But now I've moved from an emotional state to an intellectual state. And just that act in itself dissipates some of the fear. So,
you know, Tony, I'm loving this so much, and I know I promised you, you know, to not to keep you for too long. So maybe before we wrap this up, I would be remiss if I didn't touch really quickly, at least, on self-defense. And you mentioned the 3Ds before. So for people that, you know, don't have any clue about, you know, self-defense yet, how can they, you know, try these, or, you know, really use these 3Ds for life in order to really keep themselves safe?
So we break down confrontations almost like look at it as a map. And this isn't like a perfect model, but it's, you know, 97% of the time, even more, this is how it happens. There's 3 phases: detect, diffuse, defend. Detect and do. So we say you need to have situational awareness. So that's the D1, detect. Then there's usually some sort of conversation, a setup in a confrontation. Hey, excuse me, did you see my dog? Can you give me directions? You know, can you spare a buck? You got a cigarette? That's the defuse part. And then if push comes to shove, there's the defend. So what we do when we're teaching people is that if you see it in those 3 phases, that changes your situational awareness. Most places that teach self-defense, as good a job as they're doing, their focus is on the physical part: how to get out of a headlock, how to throw a kick, how to do a block, how to do you know, a gun takeaway. The problem with that isn't that the skill set's the problem, is that the most important part of self-defense is the situational awareness. If you have no awareness, you have no chance.
Yeah.
So if you're not cultivating situational awareness in your training, even if you're so we'll teach how to get out of a headlock, but we teach people how and why you would have gotten caught by a headlock. So the education is even further back in the timeline of the scenario. We don't start in the headlock. We don't start with the grab. We start with, why would this happen? How would this happen? What type of scenario would you be in? So what's happening there is you're creating mental blueprints in your brain, and this enhances this metacognitive process where instead of me starting, have you ever done any self-defense martial arts?
I've done judo, but I was like a small little kid. Yeah.
Okay. So for example, you're doing judo. When they teach you a hip throw, you start off, you grab the gi, you wrap your hand in there, you get it. They correct, how you're going to grip it and do some stuff. They teach you a break fall. And then it's like, judo's great for self-defense, but think about this, the myelinization of the neurotransmitter in the brain requires that someone's got some clothing, a jacket you can grab, and now you need to be in here and get in here, and you're going to do this hip throw, you're going to do that stuff. There's no verbal de-escalation, there's no situational awareness. So for the layperson in the street, the most important thing that you want to learn and understand and do is improve your situational awareness first. So let's say you're listening to this and you go, you know what, I'm never going to do a martial art, I'm never going to do a self-defense class. But how can I get safer? How can I make myself and my family safer? So your intuition is like a biological GPS. Every victim of violence who lived to tell the tale said they had a bad feeling. I've interviewed hundreds of people. I go, and then what happened? And then what happened? And at some point in the interview, never right away, they go, I knew when I parked the car that something was up. But I got on my phone and I, like there was always there's some little pre-contact cue, but it's your intuition. So I want everyone listening to this, your intuition is like a biological GPS. And what I mean by that is like your GPS, when you miss your turn, what does your GPS say? It says you're going the wrong way, make a legal U-turn. So I jokingly refer to this intuition as the body's biological GPS, which says you're moving somewhere and you're trying to you're late. So you take this shortcut and you're in an unlit street in unfamiliar territory, and you grab your phone because you take your GPS out, and now you look like somebody who's lost in an area that you don't know, and all the opportunistic criminals go, that person is perfect, prey. And so I tell people, choose safety. The most important thing here, if you're untrained, even if you're trained, is to choose safety. What is the safest thing I could do right now? The safest thing I could do right now is not walk down the street looking at my phone. Like if you just stop, and it's almost like when we're studying fear and we're analyzing fear, I tell people fear can teach you what you should do next. And people go, well, how's that? Because you're visualizing what you don't want to have happen. Just ask yourself, what should I do to mitigate or ensure that doesn't happen? If I don't do what I was visualizing to set up that from happening, that won't happen.
Yeah.
And then you stop and you go, holy fuck, is it that simple? Yeah, it is. Don't get stuck in the corner taking body shots. Well, how would I do that? You need to move. Well, how would I do that? You got to do these drills. Well, how do I do that? You need to spar. And suddenly you cultivate exactly what you did to get relaxed on a podcast. You got to do reps, and they got to be realistic, relevant reps. So for your listeners, I'm going to pretend you're not going to, even if you're like a black belt, 10th degree black belt, choose safety. If your intuition says something's off with that guy, there's something wrong in the restaurant here, I think that car's following me, the safest thing to do is to check it out. There's no downside to choosing safety, but there's a severe downside to ignoring it and finding out that your intuition was right. So imagine this, you get a fear spike about somebody or something, and you explore it and you find out it was nothing. You imagined it. You misinterpreted a pre-contact cue. Are you safe? Yeah. And you practiced courage. But if you say, you know what, I'm being paranoid now. I live in a bubble. This area is safe. I know that guy. Nothing ever happens around here. And it turns out to be a true fear spike triggered by real danger. You're so far behind the curve at that moment that you've now created and amplified the problem.
So it sounds like you need to really deliberately practice this courage whenever you have this feeling, whenever you have this tickling that something may be wrong, you need to practice it, even if it's not a real thing, right? But just in case it is, so you can actually get better at it.
Exactly. I mean, you want to do that almost like you have a stopwatch, right? right? How many times? So I've had several people that I mentored and trained in my self-defense business break away and rip me off, and they've done it in less than ethical ways, right? I have no problem with people being an entrepreneur, but I have had people, 4 or 5 people over a 30-year career, really, really do that. And the reason I bring that up is because while it was happening, I saw in our relationship the signs that this was the type of personality that is prone to lacks of integrity and loyalty and betrayal. You can see it in the way people communicate in emails, in behavior. And when these things happen, there was a part of me that went, I fucking knew he was going to do that.
Wow.
But I didn't trust my intuition. You've had, and everyone listening to this has had somebody betray them in a relationship or in business, where when it was all said and done, somebody close to you said, I knew that guy was going to screw you. I knew that was going to happen. I knew she wasn't right for you. I knew he wasn't. And you knew it too. But the romantic in us goes, no, 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 that can't be happening. Let me give them one more chance. Right?
Yeah.
And this is an example where I'm taking it out of the self-defense realm to show that our intuition doesn't lie. And that had you or me or anyone listening practice courage when they had the first moment of doubt and fear, we would have created a harder conversation back then, but maybe avoided a whole bunch of grief years later. Yes. So the application here of detect, diffuse, defend applies not just to self-defense, but to relationship management too, and business. That I develop situational awareness. Something, there's an anomaly, something's off, there's some dissonance. I get a fear spike. Should I go confront this colleague? Nah, they're not. Cognitive dissonance. I shut it down. I redirect. I don't like confrontations. And then a year later, they steal some intellectual property, or they break away and do their own thing, or, and like, there's so many examples of this. So how do we fix that? We develop greater self-awareness, so we create better transparency and better skills at communicating to ourselves what we're thinking, and then find a way to communicate that to our family or our friends, all with the singular focus of making things better.
Yes, absolutely love that. Now, Tony, before I ask my final question, where can listeners connect with you online? So what's your favorite, social media platforms, websites? Where can people find you?
I'm on all of them. I post regularly on Facebook, post regularly on Instagram. I don't use Twitter that much. I don't understand it. I mean, I've been on it for years, but Instagram, we've got, my personal account, which is, I think, Tony Blauer or Tony.Blauer. I think it's Tony Blauer, one word.
Cool. I'll link to it.
Yeah. Yeah. And then we've got our spear.system. We've got a Be Your Own Bodyguard, and got my No Fear podcast. We've got 4 platforms there. Our main website is Blauer, my last name, Blauer, Spear, for the behaviorally based self-defense system. Spear is spontaneous protection, enabling accelerated response. It's all about weaponizing the startle flinch. And, if you just Google Tony Blauer, fear, Tony Blauer, self-defense, like stuff should pop up.
For sure. Now, my final question is, what is your quest for greatness? So what's that personal mission or vision that you want to bring to the world?
My singular focus for decades, literally since 1980, I got asked, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to make the world safer. And so that's what I've been working tirelessly on for decades. Now we've got hundreds of affiliates around the world. We've got a mobile training team in several countries, running courses for law enforcement, for military, emergency services, for the general public. So my focus is still, how do I make people safer? As I mentioned many times, in the the study of that, I recognized that the single greatest factor in how somebody moved in a scenario or in real life was their ability to manage fear. And that became a standalone program for no fear. So when, to me, I don't think about greatness in a like in that way. I would use it in a sentence. Wouldn't it be great if all kids learned how to look at fear like Glenn Sunshine's
Yes.
son and daughter? Wouldn't it, the self-defense program that I created, I wish somebody taught me when I was 12 years old. It changes how you relate to bullying. It changes how you relate to fear. It changes to, how you relate to everything. Because if you change your confidence, then when someone says, what do you want to do or be when you get older? If you understand how to mitigate fear and you understand how to defend. So self-defense is a bigger umbrella picture. What you eat is a type of self-defense. What you read is a type of self-defense, right? These are all things that help shape you. If you eat organic and clean, you're changing your inflammation and energy systems. That's self-defense for your life, right? So to me, I would rather use the word great in the sentence of, wouldn't it be great if there was less violence? Wouldn't it be great if people were safer? Wouldn't it be great if somebody who really wants to be an actor, a politician, a race car driver, a soldier, a mom or a dad, if they could wrestle with their fears and what society or their peer group expects of them and go, no, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to defend my right to make my dream a reality.
All right, guys, that's it for today. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you gained some valuable ideas, tips, tools, tricks, mindsets, belief systems that will hopefully inspire you to take your life to the next level. At the end of the day, guys, it's all about application. The only thing that's going to set you apart tomorrow from where you are today is how much action you take with those ideas that you gained. And so I really want to challenge you at this point to, not just listen to this passively, to not just consume this, passively, just think about other things, but to really take those lessons, take those ideas that you just gained and start applying them to your lives, to really start taking action and sprinting towards those goals and those dreams that you have in your life. Now, guys, at this point, I want to ask you for a huge favor. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider heading over to iTunes and leaving a review, as that helps me really grow the show and reach more people, impact even more people around the world. If you have a family member, a friend, a loved one maybe, that you think could benefit from this content, please consider, sharing it with them, forwarding to them, as that helps us really build a community of like-minded people that are all about maxing out their lives. Now, guys, with that being said, thanks so much for tuning in today. I really, really appreciate it. Stay strong and see you tomorrow.